we'll do the live thing first. Like, hey everybody, welcome to the Bigmark podcast. It's me, your host, Bigmark. I'm here this week coming to you totally solo. My brother Christian, our boy behind the camera, he has had an awesome opportunity. He's working, doing some film stuff. He's working on set, doing some PA stuff, which is going to be so cool. Can't wait to hear more about it. But like I said, I'm all here with you, and I'm using a new camera. We got our new lighting set up. Man, we're making new steps. It's going to be super fun. But if it's your first time here, welcome. Hopefully everything looks good. And if you like what you hear, please like the podcast. Please subscribe. Hit the bell so you know when, if you're watching on YouTube, you know when we drop a new video. And tell your friends about it. Rate the podcast. Do all that stuff. And if you want to support, go check out the Patreon. We have our Patreon at the Bigmark, patreon.com/the Bigmark podcast. Go check us out there. And there's different tiers. There's different exclusive stuff that we like to put on there. But here we are this week. And I actually wanted to sit down since it's just you and I. Been doing a few of these solo ones lately. I've been really liking it. I've been hearing some good feedback from everybody. And, I watched this wicked documentary, one of my favorite documentaries called 3 Identical Strangers. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Really, really interesting story. Like all these documentary themed, if you will, podcasts, I like to just recommend, go check out the documentary, of course. I kind of go through it, but generally the story itself is just so much cooler when you check this out. And, if you're just listening, check out YouTube because, that's when we can put up some pictures and stuff and cool things like that for everyone to see. And, we're, going to get into things. And, I love these documentaries that I watch and I want to share them with everyone. And, on the Patreon too, I'll do even more in-depth reviews. And, we just want to spread the word about this stuff. And I've always loved watching movies, watching films, but documentaries have always been near and dear to my heart. But it's always about the root of the story. And today, we're going to get down to the root of this story. So again, 3 Identical Strangers, really interesting story. So it starts in 1980. Let's just go back. This gentleman from New York City named Bobby Shafran is driving up to college in upstate New York. It's his freshman year. He's 19 years old. He's doing his thing. It's his first day. He's first time on campus. He's getting there. He was never really a popular kid in high school, but for whatever reason, everyone's coming up to him, giving him high fives, saying, "Hey man, what's up? It's been so long. How was your summer?" Girls coming up and kissing him and stuff. Wild. And one of the people come up to him and say, "Eddie, how are you?" And it's like, Eddie, the guy's name's Bobby. It's like, what's going on? So eventually Bobby's in his dorm room, and he's hanging out there. All of a sudden, this guy rushes in. He's like, "Hey, Eddie, is that you?" And Bobby's like, "Nah, man, like, my name's Bobby," kind of thing. Like, I'm not Eddie. And the guy goes, "All right, were you ever adopted?" And Bobby goes, "Yeah." And then the guy goes, "Is your birthday July 12th? And Bobby goes, "Yeah." And this guy, who turns out to be Eddie's friend, goes, "Man, you have a twin." And they end up rushing to a payphone, and they frantically call Eddie. And Eddie picks up the phone, and Bobby's like, "Hey, man." And Bobby was like, my voice was on the other end of the line. And he said, "Hello." And he's like, "I think you're my twin." And anyway, they ended up getting together. They both find out that they were adopted from the same agency. And Bobby and Eddie Eddie's friend hop in a car and they actually go find Eddie. They end up getting stopped by the cops because they're friggin' speeding on the way there. And they try and tell the cop, like, oh man, this guy has a twin. He's never... And the cop just goes, yeah, okay, pal. Here's your ticket. Get the hell out of my face. And Bobby, Bobby gets to the house. Bobby and Eddie's friend get to the house. Bobby goes up. He reaches to knock on the door. And as he's reaching to knock on the door, it opens. And, Eddie's standing there. And they both look at each other, and they both kind of do that mirror game where, one kind of looks over and, he kind of tilts his head to one side, and the other guy tilts his head to one side, and it looks like they're both looking in a mirror. And Bobby said, the world faded away, and it was just me and Eddie. And it must have been such an interesting moment, for them both, not knowing that they ever had, never had a brother. And now they actually have a twin brother, wild, and they're 19 years old too. It's not like they're young kids. So obviously this story kind of starts becoming popular, and Howard Schneider was editor at Newsday at the time. He was working on the story, and his initial thought was it's a hoax. And so he sends a reporter out, and the reporter confirms the story, and essentially the reporter goes, this is where the story went from amazing to incredible, because they published the article. Obviously they say, these two guys met each other. They put up a picture in the New York Post, and Ellen Cervone and Alan Lukes saw the article. And they're both looking at the newspaper, and they're reading the article, and they're shocked by the article that there's these long lost brothers and they're finding each other. But they're more shocked by the fact that both guys look like their friend David. So they tell their friend David, and it's actually one of the most defining characteristics, they said, is actually in their hands. They all have these like really big meat hook hands. And that's what gave it away to all their friends and family, which is super cool. But David Kellerman, who is David, as I mentioned, saw a picture. So his friends, Eleanor and Alan, gave David the article, and he takes it to his mom, and he's like, "Hey, look at this! Like, there's these pictures." So he ends up calling the Post, and he says, "Hey, like, I saw the picture of the twins reunited, and I saw the picture, and it looks like me, and I'm also happen to be adopted from that same agency, which is called the Louise Wise Services in New York City." So they all get together. So the three of them all are identical. I'll show you everyone watching on YouTube. I'll put up a picture there, but you can tell that obviously they're identical. And it's not even just that they look identical. Everyone says that they had the same mannerisms. Eddie's aunt said when they first got together, they were meant for each other. They ended up, by the end of the day, they ended up wrestling on the floor like puppies. And, again, like who, for the first time meeting someone ever, end up wrestling, it's not a natural occurrence. But again, obviously these guys are siblings, and there's something special there that, especially between, twins, and I can imagine between triplets as well. It's just like, there's this like magical bond that's there, and it's unspoken, and it's just like, again, to anyone who's not a twin, it's next to impossible to imagine, I'm sure. So them all coming back together must have been amazing. Bobby says, so when they're talking about how much do they look like each other, Bobby says he looks more like Eddie than Bobby looks more like Eddie than Eddie did David, and he looks more like David than he did Eddie, and Bobby looks more like either of them did each other. If that makes sense. Anyway, pretty jokes, but they're identical twins or triplets, and it's just was blowing people's minds. This is the 80s in New York. Everyone's having a great time. And, this was like such a huge story. It became national news. And, right before this was all coming together, Eddie he said that, I don't know if this is going to turn out to be great or terrible. And so there was always this kind of question mark that surrounded the story. And it's just, really, really interesting to think that, right off the bat, it's kind of like, oh man, how is this really going to pan out? So like I said, it became national news story, talk shows, news stories. They were on People magazine. They're on the cover of Time magazine, or they're in Time magazine, the New York Times, Good Housekeeping. They were just all over, right? So again, national news. And, again, their behaviors and personalities were all the same, despite being total strangers. They all wrestled at one point. They smoked the same brand of cigarettes. They liked the same colors. They had the same taste in women. They all liked older women, apparently. All brothers had an adopted sister that was 3 years older. So at the time, all their sisters were 21. And again, once they all got together, they loved each other. It was just like that. It was really, really interesting to think that, there's that bond there that I talk about, that, it's just to think that someone separated these children for whatever reason. It's, it's kind of hard to believe that, you can imagine these three babies, and Eddie's aunt speaks of this in the documentary too. These three babies are right beside each other and they're born, and then all of a sudden they're taken apart from each other. And I think they were adopted around 6 months old or so. So like they spent a long time together before that they were taken away from each other. And again, super, super sad, super interesting. But again, we'll get into more here. One of the main differences, though, between them, is, with barring all the similarities, is that they all started figuring out that they all grew up in pretty different households. David kind of grew up in lower class, least educated immigrant parents. But his father was generous and warm. They called him Babala, which is Yiddish for love and kisses. He exuded love, and he was just such a great parent. Eddie's family was from middle class. His father was a teacher. They were college educated. Solidly middle class. And then Bobby's family was upper class. His father was a doctor. His mother was an attorney, really well educated. They lived in a really, really prestigious area, actually, not only in New York City, but in the entire country. So, he was really well off. Again, full university education. So that was one of the first things that they all kind of noticed, that their families are all a little bit different. But again, David's father, Babala, was just such a generous, warm guy, and he was such a loving man that, he said, once he met the other boys, he said, I have 2 more sons, and he embraced them as his own. And, when they were all together, apparently that's when they were happiest, which is really, really interesting. So, all this stuff is going on, and no one's asking any questions. But the only people who are concerned, of course, are the parents. They're going, why didn't we know that our children had siblings, let alone they were triplets? So, the babies, one of the parents was kind of saying that, each of the children, like Bobby, Eddie, and David, all kind of had troublesome, like, infancies. When they were babies, they used to hit their heads against the side of the crib till they passed out. They used to hold their breath until they passed out. It was just clearly separate. Like, they were saying there was some clear separation anxiety happening with the kids. And this is obviously when they were children, before that they knew that they had been separated as kids. So, they kind of chalked it up to, again, all these kids are adopted. So, maybe that there's going to be some issues potentially, and they probably just chalked it up to that. Again, this is the 60s, right? These kids were all born in July 12th, 1961. So, again, this was a different time. Let's put it that way. So, like I mentioned before, they all came from the same adoption agency called Louise Wise Services. Louise Wise Services was started in 1916. It was overseen by a board of directors drawn from New York City's social, financial, and political elite. So this is basically the preemptive adoption agency on the East Coast, and is specifically for Jewish babies. So, a lot of preeminent people in New York City were Jewish, and of course the children that they wanted to adopt, they preferred them to be Jewish as well, and I guess, dealt with in the Jewish tradition. So again, these were the people that kind of ran the show. So it was again, a preeminent, prestigious adoption agency. Justine Wise Polier actually was the president of Louise Wise Services at the time, was quoted as saying, adoptive parents should be told as much about the background of the child, which is reasonable. So what does reasonable mean? Like, in her mind, she's choosing to hold some stuff back, and you're just going to tell them what you deem to be reasonable? How about you tell the parents about the background, about all of it? Don't leave anything out. What are you saying? So, of course, once all this stuff comes out, the parents, once they figure out all the boys are related, the parents go straight to the agency and they go, what the hell's going on? They go to a meeting with the top brass. They basically sit down and say, is it true that these boys, were separated at birth on purpose? And, the answer was yes. They said we did that on purpose, and the parents were enraged. They were going, why? How could you do this? Like, how could you separate these children? And they just said the reason was it was hard to place 3 children in one home. They just thought that, having triplets is going to be difficult, let alone, adopting one child. It might be difficult to find a family that's going to actually want to adopt triplets. But Bubba especially was furious because he said he would have taken all 3. He said if he saw them, didn't matter, it would have been, he would have taken them. So obviously the parents kind of take it as, okay, that's I guess reasonable enough reason to say, that's why we took the children apart from one another. So the parents left, and I guess they were satisfied, but Bobby's dad actually forgot his umbrella in the meeting room, and he runs back inside to go get it. And as he runs back inside, all the people that they were just meeting with from the adoption agency were like cracking a bottle of champagne, like toasting a victory. And his dad was kind of saying it looked like they were celebrating, like they just got away, like they just dodged a bullet kind of thing. And, that was super, super fishy. So especially with Bobby's mom being a lawyer, the family went to lawyers to take legal action. And at first, a lot of lawyers and associates were excited to take on this this lawsuit, because it was like, this is brutal, what's going on, this is ethicalness, there's, it's specifically about Jewish kids too, and this is not long after all the atrocities that happened in Europe and the Holocaust and everything. But soon after, all the associates started backing out because the lawyers said some of the people that they were working with and their partners were trying to adopt through Louise Wise as well. So they didn't want to hurt their chances of getting a kid. So it's like, man, like, can't win. So they dropped that lawsuit. But on the upside, the boys didn't actually really care so much at that time. They were just happy to be together. They were 19, 20 years old roughly at the time, and They were just wanted to party. They were in New York City in the 80s, and it was just a wild time. Sex and drugs and rock and roll is what they said. Madonna actually ran into them in the street and asked them to be in one of her videos. They lived together in the city, which one of their friends described to imagine a bachelor apartment times 3. So you can imagine what was going on there. Alan, their one buddy, said the liquor store used to deliver directly to the apartment. And one time Eddie had appendicitis and he had no insurance. So they checked him in as Bobby because Bobby had insurance. So hopefully Bobby never has any appendix issues later in life. They legit like took out Eddie's appendix thinking that he was this Bobby. So anyway, wild. All their wives say, of course, their husband was the most handsome of the 3, which I thought was cute. Obviously they're all identical, but each one of their wives thought theirs was the best. If there was a scale, so one of the wives was saying if there was a scale, Bobby would be reserved, David was in the middle, and Eddie was larger in life, and exuded love, and was just the life of the party. And Eddie was the one who got the most of everyone being together. He was also actually one of the ones who tried to push them to try and find their birth mother. And so they actually all went to the New York Public Library, and it was all in the records there. And they found them within a couple hours, and they actually went and met her at a bar in the Lower East Side, and which is a little bit of a red flag to start. But hey, what can you do? And it turned out, it was a prom night knock up. She was a young girl, had triplets, had to give them up, and the boys were kind of left with less than thrilled. They kind of got drunk with their mom there too, and it was just like, again, they were less than thrilled, but they moved on. And the boys actually ended up opening a bar called Triplets, which was apparently wildly successful in New York in the 80s, and must have been just a time. So again, all this stuff is still national news, still bubbling up, and they're running their business and started living their lives. Meanwhile, while this is going on, Lawrence Wright, who's a journalist in the mid-90s, was starting to work on a story about children separated at birth. So in his research, he came across this study called the Psychoanalytic Study of the Child, which I actually remember hearing about this in university in one of my psychology courses. I think it was abnormal child psych. We actually talked about this study and some of the findings from it because, not necessarily, because truly it was more anecdotal than anything, and I'll get into that. I'll get into more of that in a second. Essentially, this study though was. It was a secret study where they took identical siblings and separated them at birth for science. Essentially, it was a science experiment. Then they were all from the one adoption agency in New York City, which happened to be the Louise Wise Services, which again is the same place. So. The pieces of the puzzle are starting to kind of form here, and it's starting to go, what the hell's going on? When they asked the boys, David said they didn't really recognize it until it was in the papers, and it was right in front of them until it was real. And the guys were starting to remember, and they were looking back, and they say they remember that there was researchers, people coming in to their homes every once in a while for years. To do tests. They did personality inventory tests, they did IQ test, hand-eye coordination test, Rorschach test, the gambit again. And this was all filmed, film the boys playing, show them in your new bike, do jump. Like, again, this was just like full on research. And the parents just were told that it was just a study about adopted children. Actually around age 9 or 10, David said that, he was starting to get sick of it. So, the guys were starting to be cognizant of this, and it was just really, really strange. it must have been, it must have been so strange for these kids. And so it turns out that Dr. Peter Neubauer was actually the lead researcher on the project. He's an Austrian refugee of the Holocaust, which is odd, but hey, what can you do? And he led the team of researchers of the sibling study. They actually studied parental involvement. So it wasn't just necessarily about the siblings and the individuals themselves. It was more about the actual parents. And it's weird because, how would they know the parents before? But remember I said that each one of the boys had an older sister, and they were all adopted from Louise Wise as well. I want to say Justine Wise. I don't know why, but the Louise Wise Services place. And so the researchers already had information on these parents because they had an older sibling that was already there. So deep, this goes deep. This is in the making for a while. And, basically, again, they were understanding parental styles effect on children. So it was a large study, and basically they wanted to see how much the parenting style affects the final outcome of the child. And the best way to do that is to get identical siblings and put them into different situations to see the outcome. So just, again, kind of just treating these kids like lab rats, and very, very, the ethical nature of this is just so hazy at best. And of course, when the three boys were coming out and all this information was on the news, all this stuff, more siblings started coming out of the woodwork. Actually, George Stroumboulopoulos interviewed these two women who were twins, and they found out that they were part of this study as well and didn't know of each other's existence. And there's actually potentially at least one of the researchers in the documentary that worked on the project. They actually speak to some of the research assistants that were part of the project. One of them says there's at least 4 people who are unaware that they were subjects of this. So if they've never seen the documentary, and if you're listening to me right now, and you're adopted from Louise Wise Services, between 1960 and 1980, and you had someone come to your house and film you and say it was part of an adoption study, and you have a sibling that's a couple years older, look into it. That's all I'm saying. Just check it out. That's all. Just check it out. Biggest issue with this whole study is that it was actually never published. So again, I believe that the legal ramifications of all this stuff, and truly they kind of ended the project when the boys kind of came out into popular culture, which is, again, very, very fishy. So, when the boys kind of learned about this, they wanted to get some data from the project, and what they were given was just raw data, and it didn't really mean anything. And again, they were kind of going, what's going on here? We were literally subjects of the study, and you're not going to let us even get this information. Neubauer actually put the entirety of the files on a seal till 2066. So basically, until all the subjects are dead. That's what he's thinking, once they're all, or in their 80s at best, that then we can release this, because there's no conclusion. There's boxes of information, and with the documentary and all that coming out, the boys actually did get to see this information. It's just the problem was there's still no conclusion. So someone's hiding something. I don't know if it was necessarily Dr. Neubauer's idea to intentionally destroy the families. One of the researchers says this was the 60s. It was a very different time. But it's so hard to justify any of that, even for science, right? So, however, becomes one of those interesting questions where, it's very ethically wrong, but, this did happen. It's not just we just throw this information out, because essentially the researchers saw it as an opportunity to get to the root of nature versus nurture. And, like I said, they shared all these same mannerisms, all this stuff. So there's so much behavior that's so hereditary. And it was kind of a dry and sad conclusion that we don't have as much influence over our lives because our behaviors are so hereditary. And, I think last time Christian Aubin was on, we spoke a little bit about Robert Sapolsky's work. He wrote this great book called Behave, and he actually kind of completely contests this whole idea. And I'll get into a little bit more of that later, but he basically talks about how, that there's so much more to environment that shapes how genes express themselves than necessarily nurture. But again, super interesting, because they just noticed all this stuff, and this was what was recorded in the study, is that most of these kids were just so utterly similar, even though that they are separated. So, excuse me, again, it's a monumental study in the fact that it will never be done again. Obviously the ethics are crazy, but there's something obviously wrong about playing with human lives. And right now, the Jewish Board of Family Services hold access to the records, and they won't really give them up. They're the ones that are actually, keeping most of that stuff sealed. And most of the funding was actually from a private firm in Washington, which is really, really interesting. So again, all this stuff is just, there's just a fishy nature to it. And, the more the guys were trying to dig in, and it shows it only a little bit in the documentary, but it shows a little bit like, David's on the phone kind of saying, hey, like, can I get access to this stuff? Because I was actually one of the subjects of the study. So, it's sad to say that some of this stuff is still under wraps, again, until 2066 at least. And even though the guys saw that, like, does that mean the conclusion is still held back? A lot of the stuff that the boys saw was redacted. So it's kind of one of those things where, what are we going to do? Maybe see what happens in 2066, I guess. Back to the boys a little bit, working together. Obviously they own the plays, they own triplets, as successful as it was, it started to put a strain on their relationship. It was really interesting. They, as much as they were similar in siblings and everything, each one of them had a different work ethic, and, they never really grew up together. They never really learned how to deal with each other's work ethic and personality, and know that, okay, yeah, Bobby's not so good at this, but, Eddie's good at this, and synergistically kind of figure it out. With that strain on top of everything, Bubba actually passed away, and, he became, he was that kind of glue, right? He became that glue with the family, and, it really, really, really started to strain the boys. And with all that stress, Bobby actually ended up leaving the business, and it really, really crushed Eddie, and all that stuff happening, and, the boys not being able to be together, and, David's dad dying, and it was just really tough on Eddie. And Eddie started acting really erratically, calling people at all hours of the night that he hadn't talked to in 10 years. And it turned out that he had, really, really serious mental health issues, that he actually ended up having to go to a facility. And, it was really tough on the boys, because they all had struggles with mental health issues as children. And it actually turns out that all of the birth parents from the study, that all the twins that were involved in the study, actually also had mental health issues. The researchers said that wasn't necessarily part of the plan, but I don't really believe in coincidences when it comes to research. There's so much effort and stuff trying to control variables and everything, that if they all have that similarity, that was part of the design. But of course, the parents weren't told about that either. So let alone the fact that their children had siblings, they were also not told that the siblings' parents had mental health issues. Of course, is mental health issues heritable? Could have been one of the underlying goals of the study. But they say, one of the research assistants himself said, again, it was meant to study the parental styles. So everyone was just in the mix. And, it's really, really, really sad that so many people were so duped. And, you can tell, right? Because each parent had their own style too. And, David's dad, like I mentioned, Bubba, was the standout, loving, great father. Bobby's dad was always very busy because he was a doctor, but he was very devoted to his kids. So he was, Bubba was more of a loving attachment style. And then Bobby was a little bit more of a detached style, but still around and loving. But Eddie's dad was very strict, and they didn't really have a good relationship. He didn't really talk. Eddie didn't really talk much about his dad. He wasn't very loving. His dad in the documentary says, we protected each other as a family. We didn't really talk about each other's issues, and because we wanted to protect each other from feeling that way. And it's like, oh man, sad to say, Eddie just didn't have a good run at it. And everyone kind of focused on all their similarities, but they had many differences, and each guy's life kind of ended up relatively different. And I think this whole thing just points, it's all about nurture. Like I've said before, genetics load the gun, but environment pulls the trigger. These studies, as ethically wrong as they may be, we can kind of look at this and say, this does talk about what Robert Sapolsky is saying too, that the environment that we put ourselves in, yes, some of our genes might be wired to be influenced more or less by the environment. But again, the better environment we put ourselves into, the better things are going to be. Again, everything you do in life, you want to keep pushing, you want to keep getting yourself into an environment where everything is feeling right and pushing in the right direction, because that really does affect how, not only your behavior, but actually down to the genetic level. And, that truly means something. And as tough as this study was, and as fascinating as the story is, who knows, there could be more out there like this, but again, that as much as our genetics might kind of be already written, that's not, it's not fate, and it's not, things aren't already planned out. We still have that power to kind of influence the way our genes finally express themselves, and that comes through in our behaviors and everything, right? So get out there and keep loving each other. If you like what you hear, subscribe to the podcast. We love you. Hit the like button, hit the bell for notifications, subscribe to the podcast, and hit our Patreon at the Bigmark podcast, or patreon.com/the Bigmark podcast. Check us out there. Twitter at the Bigmark pod, Instagram. We love you. We want to hear from you. So the next time you're on there, drop us a little comment. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll talk to you soon. Love everybody. Peace.